The smell hits you first. Not smoke, not earth, something older, denser. A deep, rancid animal fat smell that you feel at the back of your throat more than you actually breathe. It's the kind of smell that tells your brain, before your eyes even adjust, that something very large died here. Many things. Many, many things. Then your vision catches up. You are standing on a flat, featureless plain in what will one day be central Ukraine. The year is approximately 18,000 BC. The horizon goes on forever, because there is nothing on it. No trees, no rock formations, no ridgelines. Just frozen grass, pale and brittle, bending hard to your left in a wind that you can already feel tightening the skin across your cheekbones. The sky is the color of dirty ice. It has been that color for weeks, and the temperature is 40 degrees Celsius. I want to be precise about that number because it tends to lose its meaning when you say it out loud. Minus 40. People nod. People say, "Oh, wow." And then they go back inside and pour themselves a coffee. Here's what 40 actually does to a human body that isn't protected. At that temperature, exposed skin, your face, your hands, the strip of wrist between your sleeve and your glove, begins to freeze within 10 to 30 minutes. Not feels cold, freezes. The water inside your cells turns to ice crystals that puncture the cell walls from the inside. Meanwhile, your body, which is a remarkably selfish biological machine, begins rationing. Blood vessels in your hands and feet clamp shut. Your fingers go numb. Then your feet. Your body is buying time for your core organs by sacrificing your extremities, which is a decision that sounds horrifying until you understand the math. Your kidneys are worth more than your pinky toe. The shivering you're doing right now, which is violent and uncontrollable, is your skeletal muscles burning glucose at maximum rate trying to generate heat. That burns out in a few hours. When the shivering stops, it doesn't mean you're warming up. It means you're losing. Hypothermia kills quietly. You get confused, then drowsy. Then you stop caring. Your core temperature drops below 32 degrees Celsius, and your heart starts doing things hearts aren't supposed to do. Below 28 degrees, it stops entirely. In an open tundra with no windbreak, no shelter, nothing to stop the convective stripping of every joule of warmth your body produces, the survival window is measured in hours. Sometimes less if you're wet, exhausted, or if the wind picks up. And here's the other thing about this particular place. In this particular time period, there is no cave, there is no forest. The tree line has been pushed hundreds of kilometers south by the advancing glaciers. There is no rock formation within reasonable walking distance. There is nothing, and I mean that in the most literal geological sense, nothing to build with. If you've ever looked around your apartment and thought about what you'd grab in an emergency, imagine doing that exercise in an environment where the answer to every option is, that doesn't exist here. No wood, no stone, no cave, just wind, just cold. And one other thing, bones. Because this is the late Pleistocene, and the Eurasian steppe is not empty. It never was. The open grasslands stretch thousands of kilometers, and they support an ecology that is, from our modern perspective, genuinely staggering. Woolly mammoths migrate through in herds. They die of old age, injury, and cold. Their carcasses freeze, partially decompose, and leave behind bones. Big bones. Absurdly, architecturally massive bones. A woolly mammoth skull weighs around 100 kilograms. A single lower jawbone, the mandible, weighs roughly 10 kilograms, and curves like a smile designed by an engineer. The femur of a mammoth is thicker than your torso. The tusks, which grow curved in long spiraling arcs, can reach 4 meters in length and weigh up to 90 kilograms each. These are not bones. They are structural materials. They are the ancient world's answer to steel beams and concrete blocks. You just have to be desperate enough and clever enough to realize it. Here's what I genuinely love about this, before we get to the engineering. The mental leap required to look at a pile of mammoth remains, which again smell horrific because they're frozen but not exactly fresh, and think, I can live inside this, is not a small thing. It is a category shift in how you relate to the world around you. It is the moment a person stops seeing their environment as something to endure and starts seeing it as something to solve. Someone somewhere on the Ukrainian steppe approximately 18,000 years ago had that thought. And then they got their neighbors together and started carrying jawbones. Let's talk about what they actually built, because this is where the word impossible in the title stops being a marketing choice and starts being a structural description. The site is called Mezhirich. It's a village in central Ukraine, and in 1965, a farmer was digging out his cellar when his shovel hit something unexpected. He thought it was a rock. It wasn't. He had struck the top of a mammoth skull that had been sitting undisturbed for 18,000 years. Professional excavations led by the Institute of Zoology uncovered not one structure, but four. Four complete dwellings built entirely from mammoth bones, arranged on the landscape like a prehistoric settlement. The most thoroughly documented of these structures used the remains of at least 149 individual mammoths. Let that number be what it is for a moment. 149 animals whose bones were sorted, transported, and arranged with deliberate, repeating structural logic by people who had never heard the words engineering or architecture, but who had apparently figured out the underlying concepts on their own through the sheer necessity of not dying. The foundation of the structure was built from stacked mandibles, lower jawbones, arranged in a ring. They were interlocked, fitting against each other with a precision that creates a load-bearing perimeter wall. On top of these went skulls and scapula, shoulder blades the size of a dining room table. The tusks were used as curved supports for the roof, their natural spiral shape creating arches that directed weight outward and downward, distributing it along the walls rather than collapsing inward. Individual structures were roughly 6 to 10 meters in diameter, the footprint of a medium-sized modern apartment. When you look at architectural drawings of these structures, they don't look primitive. They look deliberate. They look like someone understood the concept of a load path, the way force travels through a building's skeleton, and designed around it. Here's the thing that stops me cold every time I think about it. The tusks curve, naturally. A mammoth tusk doesn't grow straight. It sweeps in a long, compound arc. If you plant the base of a tusk in the ground and let the curve do its work, it creates an arch. An arch, as engineers have known since at least the Romans, and as these people had apparently figured out 16,000 years before the Romans, is one of the strongest geometric shapes in construction. It converts downward pressure into lateral thrust, which means the more weight you put on top, the more the structure locks itself together. These people didn't invent the arch, but they used it, because the material they were working with had that shape built in. That is not luck. That is observation. That is the kind of applied geometry that emerges when your engineering exam is build something that will not collapse on you at 40 degrees Celsius, and the penalty for a wrong answer is death. Over the bone framework went animal skins, hundreds of them, from horses and foxes and wolves hunted from the surrounding steppe, layered like shingles, insulating against the wind and trapping body heat inside. The total weight of the bone superstructure alone would have been in the range of several tons. These were not temporary shelters thrown up in desperation. They were built to stay. Recent analysis of small mammal remains embedded in the site suggests at least one of the Mezhirich structures was used repeatedly over a period of up to 429 years. That is not a campsite. That is a building. That is a home. And there was a detail inside these structures that says more about the intelligence of the people who built them than almost anything else about the site. Beneath the floor, dug into the permafrost, were storage pits. Permafrost is permanently frozen ground, soil that sits below 0 degrees Celsius year-round. At Mezhirich, the permafrost would have maintained a stable, reliably sub-zero temperature a meter or so below the surface. These pits were filled with meat, surplus kills, cached against the winter months when hunting became impossible. The people living in these bone houses had essentially invented refrigeration by understanding, intuitively, empirically, that the frozen ground held temperature without variation, without energy, without any mechanism other than the planet's own thermal properties. 18,000 years before electricity. 20,000 years before anyone in history gets credit for the idea of cold storage. They were using mammoth mandibles as building blocks and the Earth's core temperature as a preservation system. I think about my refrigerator. which is currently making an alarming clicking sound that I've been ignoring for 2 weeks because I don't want to deal with it, and I feel appropriately humbled. Let's talk about the scale of the logistical problem before we talk about the solution, because I think people dramatically underestimate what it took to collect this material. A single mammoth mandible weighs roughly 10 kilograms. One skull, 100 kilograms or more. The tusks, those arching structural supports, can weigh 90 kilograms each. There is no metal. There is no wheel. There is no draft animal in this time period being used as a beast of burden in this region. There is human muscle, cordage, and whatever leverage you can improvise from materials you already have, and you need the remains of 149 mammoths. Some of those bones came from natural accumulation sites, places where animals died, and carcasses collected over many seasons, which the people would have known and revisited. Some may have come from hunting. The logistics of transport across a tundra, dragging 100-kilogram skulls through frozen grass on improvised sleds, required coordination, planning, and probably a social structure capable of organizing collective labor over extended periods. This was not a solo project. This was a community decision, and here's the detail that quietly reconfigures everything when you sit with it long enough. The bones weren't randomly assembled, they were sorted. Specific bone types appear in specific structural positions across all 4 measure-rich buildings. Mandibles at the base, crania and scapulae in the middle courses, tusks for the upper arch. This isn't coincidence. This is standardization. This is a design language. A repeating pattern across multiple structures that means someone knew what worked, taught others how to replicate it, and the knowledge survived long enough to be applied 4 times over. That is not prehistoric chaos. That is a building tradition. I will confess that I find this more intellectually stunning than almost anything the ancient world is typically celebrated for, because we have a habit, a very understandable but very misleading habit, of treating technological sophistication as a function of written records and metallurgy. You had bronze? Very impressive. You left clay tablets with grain inventories? Wonderful. But the assumption that people who didn't write things down were somehow fumbling in the dark, making things up as they went, surviving by accident, the measure-rich site makes a very quiet, very physical argument against that assumption. The argument is made of bone. It weighs several tons. It has been standing, metaphorically, for 18,000 years. Here's what I keep coming back to. The measure-rich builders lived in a world that was, by every material metric, more hostile than anything most modern humans will ever encounter. No insulation except what they made, no synthetic fabrics, no HVAC, no metal tools, no architecture textbook. The only warmth available was fire, body heat, and whatever clever arrangement of materials they could engineer between themselves and the wind. And their solution, taking the remains of the largest animals on their landscape and assembling them into insulated, arched, multi-ton structures with refrigerated subfloor storage, is not the solution of people improvising desperately. It is the solution of people who understood their environment in ways that we, who interact with our environment mostly through interfaces and app menus, have largely lost the vocabulary to appreciate. We complain about the commute, about the heating bill, about the Wi-Fi dropping in the back bedroom, about the delivery arriving lukewarm. These people built their home out of the skeletons of the most dangerous animals on Earth, at the bottom of a flat, windswept, treeless plain, in the middle of an ice age. And they did it well enough that the structure survived for centuries. I'm not romanticizing hardship. Hardship is not romantic. Frostbite is not romantic. Carrying a 100-kilogram mammoth skull across frozen ground is objectively miserable. But there's a particular kind of intelligence that only gets unlocked under that kind of pressure. A clarity of problem solving that emerges when the stakes are so absolute that every option that doesn't work gets immediately, brutally eliminated. These people didn't have the luxury of a wrong answer that they could patch in the next software update. Their wrong answers killed them. The ones who survived were the ones who observed precisely, built cleverly, and taught their children what they'd learned. And somewhere in that inheritance in the knowledge that passed from those frozen plains through 18,000 years of human generations, there is a thread that connects directly to every building you've ever entered, every insulated wall, every arched ceiling, every basement cold room. Every design decision made by someone trying to keep the cold out and the warmth in. They started that conversation on a Ukrainian steppe with mammoth bones, wearing fox fur, breathing air so cold it cracked the lining of their lungs. We're still having it. We just have better materials now and a much lower pain tolerance. Think about that tonight when you adjust your thermostat. And if this kind of thing does something to you, the realization that what we call primitive is often just, we haven't found the evidence yet, drop that in the comments. I want to know what ruins your comfortable assumptions, because that's what we're here for. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time, because the next story goes somewhere equally unexpected. And as always, the past is stranger than anyone told you it was.